Hey, Carl, how's it going, man?
Good, Paul. How are you?
Good, good. From a previous conversation that we had, I was explaining how I'm doing a series on creativity, creative source, creativity in the mundane, all the way to an eccentric, tortured artist, everything in between. We create our days, we create the smallest little things, and there's a real beauty in that. And when I mentioned that, you had given me a statement. You said, you didn't even ask me about necessarily, it wasn't about what it meant to me or anything like that, but you said creativity versus competition. And when you said that, I'm like, don't say anything because I want to actually think about this for a second. And I know that you had done some work with Bob. You've done a lot of work with Bob Proctor because you've known Bob Proctor for a long time prior to him passing away. But you have some lessons in here. But what I did want to say before I hand the mic over to you is that I have an idea maybe where you're going to go with it. But when you said it, I was like, I didn't really have a correlation between the two. But if I had to guess, there might be a little thread that we might pull on. And if this isn't it, maybe we can pull on it after you can explain it a little bit more. Is I was almost thinking the lack. So sometimes I think people might think of creativity as there's only a finite amount of it. And if you use it up or you take that, it takes it from somebody else, or there's a competitive nature in somewhere in there. But it was a really intriguing thing when you said creativity versus competition. I was like, it was an interesting line. And I want to let you talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it is interesting because it's one of those things we hear about that, right? If you close your eyes and say creativity to somebody, an image pops up in their mind. If you say competition to somebody, an image jumps up in their mind. And it depends on a lot of their experience and their personality, whether they're an athlete or not. So if they're a personality versus something else, a lot of things come to mind. And I struggled with this. I was very fortunate, as you mentioned, to work with Bob Proctor for many decades. I worked with him for a very long time and had a lot of one on one time with him. And I'm an athlete. So he made that statement originally. He said, you cannot be in a creative space and a competitive space in the same time. The mind simply cannot occupy those two things. One is positive and functional, the other
Mm-hmm.
is dysfunctional and negative, right? And so obviously creativity is the positive side, right? Competition is the negative side. So I said, I want to challenge you with that, Bob. And he would let me do that a little bit. He'd give me enough rope to hang myself because he would always come up right on the right side of the
Sure.
equation. But I said, hey, I was an athlete and I was very competitive. And I used to get geared up for our big rivals. Or if I was playing against a guy I played hockey. If I was playing against the top scorer in the league, I was like, he's not going to score on us tonight. And so Bob broke it down for me to make it really make sense. And the premise is that you can't be creative and competitive at the same time. And the
Okay.
other premise is true champions and people that master don't compete against others, they
Right.
compete against themselves, right? And
Absolutely.
in that functional competitive mindset, they're actually being creative. In other words, they're creating ways to outperform themselves, which in essence outperform the other if there's an opponent, right? And so
Right.
when he started to break it down like that, it started to make sense. And Bob always used to say, functional or dysfunctional. He goes, if competition is functional and inspires you and motivates you, then it's not on the total negative spectrum of potential, right? He said, if it's something that you just fixate on your competition and you fixate on their advantages and you fixate on what they do well and you fixate and it becomes dysfunctional, that's the far end of the spectrum, right?
Okay.
He said on the other end of the spectrum we have creativity, and he goes right to creativity is is manifested in our imagination, right? And straight
Mm-hmm.
out of Napoleon Hill in the chapter on imagination talks about the creative imagination and the synthetic imagination, right? And so the creative happens in our imagination, right? We take
Yeah.
the synthetic creation or the synthetic imagination will take things that already exist and apply them differently, right? Say for
Mm-hmm.
example, our cell phone, right? Our cell phone was very basic at one point, right? It didn't have a speaker, it didn't have a lot of features. And then the camera, right? Oh, camera, right? There were phones and cameras back in the turn of the 18th or 20th century, back in the 1900s, right? But somebody got creative and synthesized the combination of the camera and the phone, right? So that's an example of the synthetic imagination.
Yeah.
There's
I
creativity there, right? So
Mhm.
you're taking two things that already exist and you're synthesizing something new. That's creative, right? Then he talks about the true creative imagination is when that's when you get inspired by new ideas, by new impulses, by new thoughts, right? From things that have never been discovered before and never been invented before.
Mhm.
Creativity has those two components to it, right? That synthetic side to it and that pure natural imaginative side to it. And
Yeah.
when you're in that space, your mind can't be thinking about competition. It just doesn't work that way. And so
Right.
those are whenever somebody says competition, I say, let's figure out a way to create. I don't believe in competition. I really don't. If you and I are in the same business, I'm totally fine with that because there's enough business out there for
Yeah.
all of us, right?
Absolutely.
If we're dealing with the infinite universe and the infinite source, right? So I can never take, I can take as much as I want and never take any of your share because by definition it's infinite. I can take,
Absolutely. Yes.
so that's where Bob comes from and that's where I come from. If someone's in my space, I say, okay, how can we get creative? Let's create more together as
Yeah.
opposed to me looking at you as competition.
I love that. I love that too. And so touched on a number of different things. I think I love the way that you illustrated is when somebody's in true creativity within their discipline or focus, they're in a league of their own. They're the greats, the Kobe's or the Jordans when you talk about basketball. They were in their own level. They weren't I hear I can't get in their head, but out using other people as an example, I know that if I'm fixed on what my competition's doing, I'm placing my energy as well outside of myself. I'm putting it in their arena. I need to focus on me, how I'm improving, how I'm delivering, how I'm showing up, where I'm at for myself, where I'm at for my clients, and that's going to set you apart. People are going to resonate with that. They're going to know that you're genuinely there for the highest and best of that in this circumstance. When I'm talking about, say, in a business capacity, like you mentioned,
Well,
they're going to know that I'm genuinely showing up for them and that highest and best. I'm not just trying to be like, and that's when you get into when somebody starts tearing down the competition. XYZ company, we do it 10 times better than them. They're terrible. They do this wrong. And when you're focused on them, it's just such a negative connotation to that. So I completely resonate with what you're saying
yeah,
as far as that.
and you brought up a couple of key points about resonating, right? About energy. When you're there's seven levels of energy, right? The lowest is the animalistic and the highest is the mastery, right? When you're working and operating at that mastery level, you're vibrating at a higher, very high frequency. And they've
Mhm.
actually done body scans of that. Your frequency actually increases as you, right? And when Michael Jordan or Kobe or Patrick Kane or Gordie Howe or whoever, when you're operating at that level, you're vibrating at a different level, right? And people pick up on
Absolutely.
that, right? You're
Absolutely.
the other I love Einstein. Einstein was an incredible person, right? Or maybe not a person, but he was an incredible mind. And he never liked being called a genius. He didn't
Sure.
consider himself a genius. And the famous saying was if you asked a fish how to climb a tree, it would think it's an idiot because a fish isn't designed to climb a tree. And so what's the point? When Bob was the one that originally introduced me to that whole idea, we all are genius. We all have a genius within us. And that's one of the
Absolutely.
things I love about Carolyn and the engaged speaker. They talk about what's your genius. All of us have a genius. And so when you get in touch with that and you tap into that, you just naturally vibrate and resonate at a higher level. And you're not thinking about competition because you're just that energy just has no place. It just doesn't resonate because you're operating at such a high level in your own genius that the
Yes.
creativity, it opens up that portal to the infinite intelligence where those inspirations and things and that wouldn't normally come into your imagination. And the key is when you hang out with people like that are
Right.
resonating at that level, we've all been there, right? You're in a room and
Absolutely.
the ideas just flow.
Absolutely.
That's the
Because
creativity.
yeah, that exchange, the best starts coming out of everyone, of whomever is contributing and co-creating in those spaces.
Yeah, and the other thing is, listen, we are all human beings are creative beings, right? Bob always used to say we're not physical beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings actually in the physical realm. And so,
Having a human experience.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And if you think of it from that perspective, listen, I'm never going to be able to dunk like Michael Jordan. I can close my eyes and imagine I can, right? I'm never going to paint like Galileo or Renoir or Da Vinci or anybody else. In my mind, I can create that, but in the physical world, we have limits, right?
Absolutely.
But in the intellectual world and the spiritual world, which are the higher levels of vibration, right? The higher levels of existence, there is no limit. We literally can close our eyes and do whatever we can think about it. So that's where creativity exists on that
Hmm.
level. On the it manifests on the physical level, but it exists on that higher level of intellectual and spiritual. And
Yeah,
if you really think of it like that, there are no limits. There are no
absolutely.
limits.
Yeah,
And when you start to bring it down to competition, you're a better painter than I am, or a better dribbler than I am, or a better skater, or you make a better widget, you're really operating at a lower level. When you elevate to the creativity, that's where people like Jobs and Wozniak took it to the next level. They took a bunch of circuits and stuff that they got at Hewlett Packard. I don't know if you know that story. They called
yeah,
Hewlett and Packard and said, "Can we come get some parts?" And they took all those parts and they created a whole nother industry, right? And so
right.
they're operating at a higher level.
Yeah, absolutely beautiful. Did you say the 5 or the 7 levels?
7 levels. Yeah, 7 levels.
7 levels. Do you have those memorized?
Yeah, I do. So animalistic is the very basic level.
Baser level, sure.
You operate the very basic, right? That's animalistic. You are just existing, right?
Mhm.
The next level is the level of aspiration, right? You want to
Okay.
aspire to be something else. You want to break away from the herd. The next level is the level of individual, where you actually realize, hold on a second, you're head and shoulders above the herd. You're saying, hold on, I'm operating at a higher level, right? The next level is the level of discipline, where you experience yourself actually being a disciplined being. In other words, you give, and discipline, by the way, is not somebody else hitting you over the head at the gym. It's you giving
Mhm.
yourself a command and abiding by it. In other words, fulfilling on it. So, in other words, you say, I'm going to do X, and then you do that, right? Discipline doesn't come from the coach or from your trainer,
Mhm.
right? They'll give you
Right.
direction, but discipline comes from within, right? So, you give yourself a command and you follow it, right?
I've seen this before too, and I think you and I have even talked about it a
Yeah.
while back as well.
You-
But it's really coming from that baser level, eat,
yeah.
breathe, truly exist.
Yeah.
And then it hurt. I do like how it is that sense where you're existing, and then there's the herd and the individuality of the raising through there, maybe intellectualizing, having expression of having consciousness, awareness.
But the point
Yeah,
is, when you're operating at the highest level, you're in your creative space. When you're just existing, and let's think about this for a minute. A lot of people go through their life in quiet desperation, just existing, just
right.
meeting their physical needs. And when you start to move up that spectrum and get to a level of mastery, that's when you're getting creative. You get creative. And by the way, that's what's taken us, Bob, you say all the time, that's what's taken us out of the cave and into the condo, right? If you think
Mhm.
about it, it wasn't that long ago, Paul, 10,000 years ago. That's not that long ago, really, where we were living in
Yeah,
caves, right? We didn't have all these modern conveniences and everything else. And
absolutely not.
what has taken us out of the cave and moved us into the incredible time of to be alive now? All these things that people created, all these comforts and all these things that now
Yeah,
make our
starting
life.
in the imagination and how that manifests into in your physical reality, and you things have things like community coming together, building. Absolutely.
Exactly. And you can't, if you harp on competition, you're just
Yeah.
you're not going to get there because you can't, it's not sustainable. When you get into
Right.
that creative space, and again, human beings are creative. We are creative. Listen, you drop somebody in the middle of somewhere with nothing, they'll figure out
Yeah.
where the water is. They'll figure out how to stay warm. They will, because it's just
Yeah.
it's part of our
It,
DNA.
it's funny too because we're extremely creative creatures, even to a fault at times,
Yeah.
because it will fill in the gaps
Oh
if we
yeah.
don't understand something. We
Yeah.
start our little imaginations start going, and we just fill in the gaps what we think may be or what it is,
Yeah.
and to a fault, but to obviously to advantageous. I'm going to go back to the competition again too because it really keeps calling to me while you're talking about this. Is that placing your energy exterior of yourself, and that in essence is you're placing that with you're giving that away when you're truly in your mastery. It's you own it, uncompromising, you and it's not even a control thing. You just embody it, and it's there's the flow, that beauty of the flow, and it comes with actually many times it comes with ease, and because you're not pushing, you're not trying, you're showing up in the disciplines, repetition, because you desire it, you want something. And I like how you were going up the stages too, because there's a form of desire. I don't have something, I want something that I don't have now, and you're working for it and you're working towards it, and to create that. And I think internalizing some of that process is an incredibly powerful thing. And I think that's the creation within the entirety of everything we do. And if I'm more worried about what somebody else is doing, I'm not focused on myself. I'm not focused on that betterment or advancement.
Yeah, and it's the purpose-driven life, right? It's just it's a great book because what's your purpose? I remember a long time ago, I used to have a problem with focus, right? And so I, I remember, oh, Bob, he was great. He literally told me, this is a true story. He literally said, I want you to go outside and I want you to lay down in the grass and I want you to focus on one blade of grass. I'm like, what is he telling me to do now? Because he used to come up with some crazy
I
stuff.
love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
And I'd be like, what are you talking about, Bob? He goes, you got a problem with focus. I said, you're right, I do. He said, this is your homework. I want you to go outside on a calm day where there's no wind, and I want you to focus on one blade of grass. And literally, I sat there until I saw the grass move because the grass grows, right?
Yeah.
We don't know it, notice it because we don't watch it. We don't focus on it, right? And it was an exercise for me to focus. And what was his point? He said, Carl, he said, there's genius in a blade of grass. A blade of grass is designed to do nothing more than just grow.
Mhm.
What are you designed to do? And when we really get to that and we get down to that and say, what is my design? What is my purpose? We are all here for a reason, right? We've all manifested in this physical form from wherever we came from for a reason, a purpose. And when we get to that, you
Yeah.
just grow like grass. Like it literally just flows to you. And Napoleon Hill talks about that in the introduction. He says, when you get in your purpose, success will flow to you effortlessly. In other words, you don't know it's like, where has this been all my life?
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
And I'll
I
give you
agree.
one other example. I loved having conversations with Bob because he'd really open up your mind. I said, Bob, I said, why do we know people like Edison and Ford and Descartes and all these people? I said, when they were little kids, they were like every other little kid. They went to school. There
Mhm.
were 20 little kids running around. We don't know those other 19 kids. I said,
Yeah.
how do we know them? And you know what he said to me without hesitation? He said, because they fulfilled on their purpose. They
Oh,
recognized their genius and they fulfilled on that. That's why you know their name. And without missing a beat, he didn't have to think about it for a moment. And it's really about that. They were creative in their own space. They might not have been
mhm.
perfect in other areas of their life, right? But how we know them, they were creative and expert and masters. They mastered their purpose. And that's why we remember
Right.
who they are.
Oh, fascinating. Because there is a real connection between creativity, purpose, and genius. Now, those are words. We can all get hung up on our interpretation of a given word. There really is a beautiful connection point in that genius into purpose, in, or I'm sorry, creativity from a source point. Now, this is going to get into just my interpretation versus somebody else's interpretation, but I'm looking at as a source into, let's call it a discipline or action of purpose or surrounding or envelopment into your life because you're in the flow, you're loving it, you're being in it. And that genius comes out as, I'll say, as a result. And you may see it a little bit different in some of that sense, but and because it's not necessarily so linear, but the beauty of the connection, that adhesive quality between those three things is really beautiful right now. Is that's the way I'm seeing and feeling this conversation with that.
And you're spot on. You're exactly right. There is a connection. When you get in line with your purpose, you just operate effortlessly. People flow to you, resources flow to you, ideas flow to you. Everything just flows to you because you're
Absolutely.
operating exactly where you're supposed to be operating. Everything just comes naturally.
Yeah.
But you know, it's
Um,
but back to the creativity. This is what
yeah.
people don't understand. You are a creative genius. Human beings are naturally creative. And my kids say it all the time, oh, I'm not creative or I have a terrible memory. I said, don't say that. You
No,
don't. You
don't
have
say
a
that.
perfect memory. You might have not have perfect recall, but you have a perfect memory, right?
Absolutely.
You're a genius, right? My
Hmm.
daughters are, especially my daughters, they're like, no, I'm not. I'm like, yes, you are. Like, yeah, I
Yeah.
see it. You may not see it in yourself, but you have
Right.
a genius within you, and we all do. And that's one of the
Yeah.
things I love about Carol, like the engaged speakers. They talk about that. Tap into your genius. What's your
Yeah.
genius?
Right.
Oh,
It is really, it's interesting too because there's a sense, and I don't have the actual source of it. There's talk about cellular memory in that sense and recall, like you're talking about the difference between recall and not remembering things. There's a difference between that. there is a sense of all things are accessible to us, all knowledge, all source. We can access that at any time, from a cellular level to a spiritual level to an energetic level, frequency. It's all there. But again, too, maybe it's something as simple as in this corporeal physical world at this moment of a recall. Maybe, yes, maybe I can't access it now. So then all of a sudden I create a little limiting belief around it. Okay, human, get to chalk that up to a little human experience. But it is all there. That genius, to what you're saying, that we are all geniuses, there's no doubt that's part of this existence, and that's part of the human experience that we get to explore, have those adventures, and carry through. And the creativity, I would actually say too, there was this has come up in other conversations about creativity, is that creativity is, I had one lady explain it as or she used the term as a messenger. I view creativity as a messenger. I'm like, I love that, because creativity, it is a messenger. The message or the giving, if I create something and I'm giving this and it's in a form of a knowledge or a communication or whatever that is, or a piece of art, it carries on. Now you receive it, and then it's received, it's filtered through your experience, and then it's received by somebody else, and so on. And it carries on. It's infinite. There is no start, there is no end. And it's always there, and it always was there. And we can experience that and have it.
Yeah. No, I'm with you on that. It's that channeling, right? It's really, we do have access to it. I don't know what's going on with my lighting, but it's going crazy. But maybe my energy is starting to radiate.
Absolutely it is. Absolutely it is.
No, but yeah, no, but I'm a firm believer in that. Energy, you listen, if in this universe that we live in, there's the laws of thermodynamics and the laws of motion and the laws of physics, right? You cannot create or
Mm-hmm.
destroy energy. So where does it go? It flows, right? And if Bob would always use the analogy of a pipe, if you've got one end of the pipe all clogged up with negativity and competition, the rest won't flow. Nothing will
Yeah.
flow through it. And it's all about that flow, right? And getting in the right space, getting in the right mindset, getting around the right people, right? Having the
Mm-hmm.
right conversation. And I deal with this all the time. What's the old saying? Small minds talk about people, minds that are not really thinking that much talk about things. And really brilliant minds think about concepts. They talk about concepts.
Yeah.
They don't sit around
Yeah.
and bitch about, pardon my French, they don't complain about people or complain about
Yeah.
things. They're on thinking on a higher level, right?
Yeah. Concepts, connections. Yeah.
Being creative.
Yeah. Being creative.
And we all have that ability. It's a choice. It's a
Right.
choice. Am I going to wake up tomorrow and be creative, or am I going to be competitive? Am I going to be negative, or am I going to be positive? And again, we talked about this earlier. It's a state of mind,
Right.
and we have complete and total control over that.
Yeah. I want to say one more thing about competition too, because I know I talked about how placing your energy outside of you. And I guess in a sense too, I would say that there is, and maybe this is the thread I was pulling on when we started, was is the idea of lack or limitations on it. So like a finite game. Now there are rule sets within a game and a competition, like you brought up sports. Okay, this team scores, this team does not score, and there is a win lose at the end of this time frame game. That is the structure of it. Absolutely phenomenal. But I also think too is that in an essence of competition, there is, it's, I think sometimes people might think there is a lack of it, so I'm taking it from somebody else, or I have to take it from somebody else, and that's not the case. There's more than enough to go around, to what you said before, and it's an infinite amount. So there is no loss of, there is no loss or exchange that is required there.
Yeah. So Bob used to have a great saying. He said, "When you're dealing with the infinite, you can never take more than your share."
Yeah,
Because if you think of it, if there's an infinite, no matter how much I take, there's an infinite amount for everybody else. So when you're dealing
absolutely.
with the infinite, which is the universe, the infinite
Mm-hmm.
intelligence, the infinite, there's plenty of everything, right? You can't take more than your share. So that goes right out the window. That switches your mind from competition. Some people feel guilty. Oh, I don't want to do this because I'm going to take away from somebody else. Or if I use too much of this, that's a competitive mindset. But when you
Right.
really understand the vastness of the universe and how much energy and how many resources are out there. And again, I'm not suggesting that we're not good stewards of the earth, right? Of our limited environment, but I'm talking about at the
Yeah.
higher level, right?
Absolutely. It would be like love. If I love my children, all of a sudden that doesn't mean I love somebody else less, or it takes away from, that's the essence of that. There's no there's no pulling from some imaginary bank where there's only a limited amount of it.
And I had that conversation with my kids. I joke around with
Yeah.
them. I love you more than my one daughter goes, more than me, Dad. I'm like, no, I love you infinitely too. There's enough for all of you.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so,
Yeah,
but that's a
exactly.
great example.
Yeah.
But when you think like that, when you think that there really is an infinite source of energy, of resources, of everything else, of knowledge, it's all out there. Listen, Newton didn't invent anything; he just discovered it. Neither did Galileo or Copernicus
Right.
or anybody, right? We just
Yeah.
discovered these things, right? Because they're already here, right?
That's and I do appreciate that there is that sense of discovery of it or labeling it or categorizing it, and I think sometimes people take that into an ownership, and that's a little bit different subject. I don't want to go off on that too much, but that someday somehow they captured that. If I label the essence of feeling of love, now I have a word love, and all of a sudden I'm acting like I own that. That's not the case. It's just, but
Yeah.
it's just a discovery of something that's already there and already limitless.
If you, I don't know if you know who Lu Tsao was, but the and I never get this right, the Dao De Ching or the Dao De Ching. It was
Oh, they Dao Ching. Yes, yes.
he talks about that. He says we're just it has no limit. It has no you can't express it in words. As soon as you do, it
Mhm.
loses its essence. It just exists, and that's at that higher level. When you're, like I said, when you're really getting in touch with your genius and really doing what you love, time flies, right? Like we talked earlier, we taped 30 minutes. It seemed like 3 minutes because we were having such a great conversation, right?
Right, right.
We're in that creative mindset space flow, and so just time goes right out the window because
Absolutely.
time's a man-made thing. The,
Absolutely. Yes.
the only creature on earth that understands time is humans. Everything else has no, there's no, grass doesn't know what time is, a
Right.
tree. And when you're in that space of creativity, and we've all been there, you're writing or
Absolutely.
you're typing or you're drawing, and next hours go by, right? You're
Mhm.
like, time isn't even part of the equation because you're doing
Yeah.
what you naturally do. And that's when you're in that creative space.
Yeah. That flow state.
Yep. Yep.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Perfect. Cool, man. I really appreciate this conversation. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Listen, Paul, I enjoyed it. I'm so happy we reconnected and put, if you want to, every time we talk, we're going to get, okay, now we got to talk about this next. So
Exactly. And that's the case. That's what we'll do.
all right.
So, all right, man.
You let me
Thanks
know.
for jumping on.
I'm going to make a
Yeah.
note. 7 levels of existence is our next topic.
7 levels of existence. We're going to do it. All right, man.
Okay.
Thank